Retro.
Hey, this is Catherine Tabor, Senator Padmé Amidala from Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Stay on the light side.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we're getting back into our The Clone Wars rewatch with a look at Episode 5 from Season 3, which is titled Corruption. So this will be our first look at The Clone Wars here in 2026. Before we get into that, Jay will remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
Absolutely. We are conveniently found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So as I was just saying, this is episode 5 from season 3, which is called Corruption. Jay, would you please give us the summary for this episode?
I would love to, and I love the fact that we're in 2026 and still talking about the Clone Wars. Can I just say that? Yeah. All right, so here we go. After Padmé is invited by Duchess Satine to Mandalore, they soon discover that children at a local school are being poisoned. Further investigation reveals that Mugan smugglers have been sneaking supplies into resource-strapped Mandalore and diluting tea with a hazardous chemical. Padmé and the Duchess lead a raid on the Mugan smugglers' warehouse and catch them in the act of diluting the tea. After burning down the warehouse, Satine requests that Padmé arrange for a Jedi to come to Mandalore and investigate.
It occurs to me as you were reading that summary that I wrote that there's a whole lot of nuance that is lost trying to summarize this episode into a few sentences.
It's hard, yeah.
But the way I wrote that, it makes it sound like these Mugans are just kind of like, we're going to poison the children, which is not at all what was going on. It was they were just trying to profit. They were trying to increase profits. They were aware it was a risk, but they ignored it.
Right.
Anyway, so this is an interesting episode. It does not feature Obi-Wan, Anakin, or Ahsoka, and the action is carried by Padmé and Satine in this. What do you think about this episode overall?
Well, this one has always been one that stuck with me, and I don't know if it's just because of the fact that with being a teacher, having schools being supplied with this poisonous, mixture of tea that was obviously done very sloppily because it should never have been poisonous in the first place, stuck with me, or if it's just because it was Padmé and Satine focused. But it's always just been one of those that, like you said, it's not very action focused, but yet it outlines some of the underlying, as the episode says, corruption throughout the galaxy. And rewatching it this time also made me think of the fact that this is definitely not one that younger kids are going to probably really like a whole lot, just because of the fact that it's very political. It's very, kind of read between the lines. This is what's going on in the galaxy kind of thing. And so, I remember when my boys were little and we were watching this is definitely one of those that they probably would have lost interest in very quickly. But for adults watching the Clone Wars, it's got a lot to talk about, really. What do you think?
Yeah, I enjoyed it more this time viewing it than I did when I saw it the first time. And typically, when I watch Clone Wars, I'm binging the Clone Wars, right? And so this is an episode and it's on, but I'm not paying a whole lot of attention to it. But since we're going to discuss it, I made sure that I did pay more attention to the details here. I wish this episode had been sandwiched with a whole lot more of the Mandalorian episodes. And the reason why is because, it comes out, we just had the Baron Papanoida episode. It was the last one we talked about, which I appreciated more on that viewing. Same thing. I appreciated more watching it then, but we're really getting away from the episodes that really focus on Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka for the most part. I mean, Ahsoka was in the last episode here, but if they'd put this with, right after the Mandalorian episodes where Satine went to Coruscant and, she was working behind the scenes and the Separatists were, sending people in Death Watch to try and take her out because they were trying to bring Mandalore into the Separatist alliance. And like, I think this would have landed a bit better overall. I mean, it's a perfectly fine episode, but it just is there is some action here, but there's no lightsabers, there's no Sith, there's no clones in this, there's no battle droids or anything like that. So it's kind of like semi-removed from the Clone Wars in its own way. And so if we had just like lined up a season of the Clone Wars, kind of like the way they did with Rebels when they shifted a focus to Mandalore for a bit and had those 3 episodes where Mandalore is trying to get its neutrality, then followed up with this episode and the one that comes after it, which are a 2-parter. And then maybe some of those other episodes when, Maul puts together his underworld army and comes back. I think that would have made this much more enjoyable and appreciated more by the audience, I think. But the way that they kind of pulled it out almost, I think, is like a momentum killer in a way.
No, I agree with you. And that's one of the things about the Clone Wars that it always did was kind of do that jump around kind of, episode format. And I know that there are people that have put together lists of, okay, if you want to truly watch something with an entire arc, this is the order in which you need to do it. But I'm with you. It probably would have been a lot more for the flow and just for just the storytelling itself if it would have been coupled with some of the other episodes.
Right. So looking at what's going on in Mandalore here, so they've achieved the neutrality, which was their goal. They didn't want to join the Republic and enter into the Clone Wars on their side. Satine fought hard to keep them from joining the Separatists, even though the Separatists were offering them supplies and relief in the face of everything that Death Watch was doing in that prior arc. But this neutrality comes at a price. They got no one to trade with, which is weird because, the Trade Federation is out there always looking to, fill in a void and trade with anybody and maximize profits. So they resorted to relying on the black market to get supplies, but that's only so effective. And the problem of the Republic is now the problem of Mandalore, the corruption that has resulted from it. You've got people taking bribes from all over the place to get food and goods there to Mandalore. And then when stuff does show up, it creates this environment where we've got this tea and we're going to dilute it with a Slavin, I think is the name of the compound, which if you did the dosage right, it would have no effect on anyone who's drinking it. But if you screw it up, it becomes toxic. And so, I mean,
they screwed it up,
but is Slavin the only thing you could dilute it with? I mean, okay.
I was thinking that too. I'm like, why couldn't you just use like purified water or, some kind of sugar water or something of that nature, because Slavin you would think would cost extra money anyway.
Yeah.
It has to be more expensive than the tea itself, but.
Yeah, but this is one of those plot points that George Lucas would say you're thinking too hard on.
Right.
Fine.
100%.
So, if he can look past it, we'll move on as well. And so Satine invites Padmé here to kind of like show off the new Mandalore and where things stand, while at the same time maybe recruit her friend to get help for Mandalore in the Republic. What do you think about that maneuver? Because I've got some thoughts.
Yeah, well, I know when I first rewatched this and I thought to myself, okay, why exactly is Satine having Padmé come? She wanted to show off the new Mandalore, but then she had this huge pomp and circumstance kind of parade just to welcome Padmé. And, I thought that was kind of a little excessive because if the people of Mandalore are trying to remain neutral, why are they celebrating a Republic senator's visit so much? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe, Satine's real MO here was so they could talk boys, they could talk about Anakin and Obi-Wan, who knows? But at any rate, it's when Padmé starts speaking, the people that were in Satine's chamber there, I mean, they weren't too off base when they said, you are from the Republic trying to get us to join the Republic. We're trying to stay neutral. So I could sort of see where they were coming from in that way. But then again, I mean, Padmé does have a lot of experience with blockades and with trade routes and with her people starving and with being in a position politically that her people are being worried about. So I can kind of see a little bit from both ways. But what were your thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts, and some of the things that you said I'm going to address as well. One, I think Padme being celebrated here on Mandalore, I think is because Satine told them all how important she was when Mandalore was trying to get its neutrality and prevent the Separatists from coming in and Death Watch from taking over the planet.
That's
So I
fair.
think I
Mhm.
think it's a they're honoring her for her contribution to Mandalore.
Mhm.
One of the things that stood out to me though is that we just had that episode, the season where Ryloth is under siege from the Separatists, and the Republic wants to send aid to that world, but the Trade Federation shows up and is like, you can't, Toydaria is neutral. You can't be helping this Republic world because that, we trade with you and we trade you, but if we're seeing trading with someone who's aiding the Republic, then that puts our neutrality in jeopardy and stuff like that. Okay, not exactly the same thing since the Trade Federation's not there, but again, Mandalore fought for its neutrality, and here Satine would like to get some aid that Padme wants to give them, would love to give them there, but don't the same principles apply in some
Right.
sense there that
Mhm. Mhm.
Mandalore jeopardizes its neutrality by taking this aid. So I don't know. I'm kind of surprised we didn't get an angle where Padme was going to find a back channel underneath the table type of a method to help Mandalore deal with all these shortages that they have.
Right. Because there's definitely a lot more legal ways to
Mm-hmm.
go about having shipments coming in except for the black market because Padme knows some other neutral systems and she knows people that could potentially come to Satine's aid.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, trade routes. Satine wants more trade routes opened up by the Republic to get there, and I get it. It's not exactly entirely the same thing. It's Mandalore plans on staying neutral, but that would trade routes anywhere would allow it to trade with the Federation. I think it's Star Trek, the Republic, and then
Mhm.
the Separatists as well. And I think your point is right on. Padme's got experience with this very thing, even though her world was a member of the Republic. Trade disputes, lack of supplies, or people starving because of a blockade, she's got an insight that would be
Mhm.
helpful in all of this. And being that neutral ear, um, I did feel, I don't know. I love Padme. I think she's fantastic, but she kind of whispers to Satine, words to the effect of like, "Well, they're all bickering. Maybe a neutral voice would help if I got up and said something." And then she gives a little speech, and everyone just throws everything she says right back in her face. It's like,
Yes.
and so I was like, nice try, Padme, but I almost felt like, and I don't think this was the intent, that she was like almost trying to upstage Satine in that sense. That's the way it kind of came off. I don't think that was the
Mhm.
intent, but then this entire governing council just smacked her down right there, and it's a little unfortunate the way that came off to
Yeah,
me.
it is. And Padme does have a lot of experience with humanitarian efforts. I mean, we've seen her whole history going from system to system, helping people out of situations just like this. So I think that's probably where she felt like she could stand her ground. But yeah, I'm with you. It did kind of seem like, all right, Satine, you're not handling this very well. How about if I step in?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things you mentioned is the boy talk, which didn't. Well, I bring it up simply because Satine and Padme have like a private dinner at one point, and if you go to
Mhm.
the episode guide, they make sure to point out that like almost all the food is cube form, and
Yeah.
there's very much cubist architecture all over the place in Mandalore, except for like the domes themselves, and then they had like Nuna legs, which were not cubes, but a reused asset. But while they're having that dinner, Satine is asking, hey, what's going on in the war? What's your take on it? How do you feel about it? And Padme says a few things, which we'll talk about here in a second. But Satine does say something about like, well, Master Obi-Wan, whatever. And it was just like, she was
Mhm.
just dying to talk about Obi-Wan there, and
Right.
that kind of, a little bit, little transparent there, her feelings. And, Padme doesn't say anything about it. I don't think she's privy to what that relationship, the way, I don't know that Anakin's told her what he may have learned about things, but at any
Mhm.
rate, it was just kind of, it made me chuckle a little bit how she couldn't help but bring up Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Right, exactly, and I think it's funny because, my headcanon is because we know that Obi-Wan suspected Anakin and Padme the whole time, was
Hmm.
he telling Satine about that? So, having
Yeah.
those little conversations.
Yeah. Did they have their own like little secret phone calls late at night? When
Right.
when the parents had gone to bed, bring up your girlfriend, like way we used to do back in the 90s. So
Oh,
at any
yeah.
rate, yeah.
Yeah, mine was the '80s, I'm a little older than you, but yes.
Well, yeah, not that much older, but right, the high school age. I was in the 80s and 90s when I was in high school, but the
There you go.
but yeah, and so while they're having this conversation, the subject of neutrality comes up, and Padme says something to the effect that, she wishes she could be neutral, but she's loyal to the Republic. And then she also notes discrepancies between what the Chancellor says about how the war is going and reports from her own sources on the front line.
Mhm.
I felt like those were a couple of really loaded sentences for her just to kind of like casually say to Satine like that. What did you think about all that?
No, I totally agree with you, and, now that you have it actually laid out here in our notes, I realize exactly how, that could really be loaded, and
Mhm.
it's surprising that and obviously in this episode, that wasn't the focus, but that Satine wouldn't come back on her, and kind of want her to expand on something like that. "Oh, so what are your reports from your own sources, if you wouldn't mind sharing
Mhm.
those, Padme?"
Right. But even just like this whole notion that she wishes she could be neutral in that and there. I mean, because when we get to Revenge of the Sith, Padme asks Anakin, "Do you ever think that we're on the wrong side in
Mhm.
this?" And so that's a step beyond neutrality. Neutral is not taking a side in this war, which frankly is what the Jedi should have done in the first place. And then But then, at the end, she's like, maybe the Separatists had the right idea and are in fighting for their freedom and their right to govern themselves in the way that they see fit, as opposed to this corruption and the way things that have gone with the Republic. And she's now she's doesn't realize at the time she says that, but she's really finding herself in the middle of a very corrupt or system there on Mandalore that's about to reveal itself in multiple ways, like in a rapid succession.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I'm also reminded too of just when I think Padme was so tired of all of the back and forth as well, and that's a lot of where this might have come from, when she's here, when she says her desire to be neutral, when she says to Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, "Just hold me like you did on the lake at Naboo when there was nothing but our love, before the war and before all of these things." So I do think that there's always been kind of that yearning just to have that neutrality, but I mean, in her line of work, there's not really much you can do about that.
Right, right. And then the comments about the Chancellor and the way he's reporting it. What do you make of the way she says it? Because I can't decide if there's any doubt in the Chancellor that's crept into her voice here, or if it's her recognizing that the Chancellor's got a job to do. If this is where she is, the Chancellor's got a job to do, and he's putting a positive spin on the war because he's the morale leader of the Republic in
Right.
his
Mhm.
as the Chancellor, and so he can't be telling the public that everything is dire. He's got to keep up morale. Or is it she's looking at it, he is being deliberately manipulative here and deceiving people with the way things are going, and she's now becoming suspicious. I mean, do you have a one way or the other that you fall on that?
Well, I think again with Padme, she's kind of in a really unique situation because not all of your senators are going to be getting out and doing some of the things that Padme has been doing and seeing for herself some of the, front lines kinds of experiences that she's witnessed. So I think she definitely has a different point of view than a lot of other senators would or a lot of other officials might. And
Mhm.
but I think you're definitely on, the right track and saying exactly perfect when you say that the chancellor does have to keep up morale, but Padme always is that voice of reason in that she's always also going to question things because she's been through it. And, kind of a once bitten twice shy sort of thing with Chancellor Valorum. So
Right.
she's always, I think, kind of keeping her eye open for discrepancies.
Yeah, I that's a big one right there, is what happened with Valorum, because she had to escape from her own world to come to Coruscant and argue on behalf of her people and look
Mhm.
for relief to end that blockade so that they didn't starve to death because of this trade dispute. And, it's mind-boggling that a trade franchise could just basically starve out a world, but that's exactly what was happening. And
Mhm.
so, you got when she was in the Senate in the Phantom Menace arguing her case or trying to argue her case, the Trade Federation shows up as like, this is ridiculous. There's no proof. Where's your proof? And you had people saying this isn't happening, flat out denying it, and we should create a commission and a committee and select a commission to go investigate these claims. And she points out, it's like, I was not elected to watch my people suffer and die while you debate this in a committee. And so for her to be picking up in this situation that the chancellor's saying one thing, but she knows it to be another, I don't know at this point that she necessarily is suspicious of the chancellor, but I kind of feel like doubt's got to be creeping in at this point because she lived this very problem and it was more personal then than it is now, but it's still plenty personal as a senator in the Republic.
Mhm, and especially given everything that she went through in Attack of the Clones too,
Mhm.
and everything that she saw. I mean, just being on Geonosis and being with Anakin and Obi-Wan, I mean, she's just got a totally different perspective than most.
Mhm. One of the things that occurs to me from time to time, but really stood out to me this episode, and I'm not picking on Satine and Padme because plenty of we just saw Baron Papanoida to do it as well. But this notion that like political leaders are the ones that go out in the field and investigate the problem and take it upon themselves to raid warehouses and things like that. I mean, Duchess Satine, the head of the government of Mandalore, and Padme Amidala, senator from her former queen, are the two people leading this investigation.
Right.
Think of your favorite president from the past 30 years or your governor. Could you see them getting out in the field and like showing up at a warehouse and raiding it, and waving a gun around, looking for
Uh-huh.
illicit substances? It I get it. When George Lucas created Star Wars, he fashioned it after, to some degree, after like those old Arthurian tales where you had a King Arthur and the likes that, yeah, they are the warrior leaders of their people and stuff like that. It is their job to get to the bottom of these things. But, you know, that's not how our world works. You don't get the president like, oh, there's corruption. I'm going to go out in the field and investigate this self with myself. Where's my handcuffs? Where's my taser? Where's my gun? You appoint people to do that. But here these two are interrogating people, showing up at the warehouse, exchanging fire with the Muggins, and then ordering the place gets burned down on the spot. It's
Yeah.
perfectly in keeping with Star Wars, but a little bit bizarre outside of that.
Oh, for sure. And how do you feel about them burning down the warehouse when Satine, I know we're jumping ahead here, but
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was I mean, I understand it was deplorable to her and it was something that disgusted her, but just to be like, burn it down, I would
Mm-hmm.
think that her people would want answers in the way of like, okay, well, why did you burn this down? Why didn't you just, because they were saying, but this is evidence, which truly it was.
Uh-huh.
So how did you feel about that?
No, the lawyer in me was screaming about that.
Oh,
You
I'm
don't burn
sure.
that down in that case. It's if if you are going to rise above this corruption that's reared its head on your planet, then you need to hold these people accountable. And your evidence is right there. And
Mhm.
so now look, I am sure there's some sort of recordings, there's some other evidence that they can get, they'll have the testimony of everyone that led them there. But the captain was right to point out that this is evidence. And even Padme is like, Satine, what are you doing? She
Yeah.
reacted to that, which to me, she got caught up in the moment. And I understand why it was so personal for her because she's fought so hard for her people and keep them safe. And then this was happening right underneath her nose with people that she trusted. And
Mhm.
so, she was in that moment, but yeah, that was an unfortunate overreaction on her part.
Okay, so it wasn't just me that thought, "What are you doing?"
No, I was like, "Hey,
Good.
Satine, you're gonna need that evidence
Yeah,
there." And
that's kind of a cringe
um,
moment.
now, I guess if we want to give her the benefit of the doubt, there is a good chance that that evidence disappears if she doesn't burn it down right then.
Mhm.
They try
Mhm.
and bring some of these people to trial, and then, oh, where's the evidence? It disappeared. And so they can't use it anyway. But at least by doing this, she demonstrates to her people the lengths she's willing to go to deal with this problem. So
Yeah.
there's that. But at the same point, I think getting on a hollow feed, standing in front of this warehouse and explaining to everyone that we are aware of this problem and we've just tracked it back to its source. And and guarantee you that those responsible are not going to go unpunished on this. I also think is another very effective way of going about
Mhm.
things with it, without burning it down. But it's Star Wars; it
Yeah.
needs that action, I suppose.
Yeah. And you know what also occurred to me as well is that when we said that they screwed up the concentration of the Slaven, the Mugens really didn't tell the guy that was doing that, whoever was mixing those together, who they were eventually distributing it to. So maybe he was using a concentration that was okay for adults, but not children, you know?
Mm,
I was thinking about that. Like maybe he didn't really screw it up, but he just didn't ask the right questions. Like, oh, where are you distributing this to? Oh,
yeah.
if this is gonna go to kids, well, maybe I need to back off on the slaving just a little bit.
Well, you were talking about being a teacher and how this episode impacted you in that regard. But the thing that also kind of impressed me, it was fun that when Padme and Satine get to the school as part of their investigation, and they're talking to, I can't remember if it was a scientist or if it was actually someone who worked at the school, but no, someone who worked at the school. And he's explaining that,
Mhm.
they've tested all the food and everything's fine. What about what they drink? Well, they drink natural water and that can't be poisoned. And then they see these little containers, which the trivia guy pointed out was based off of a drink that was supposed to be an Attack of the Clones or something that Obi-Wan was going to drink. But
Oh, nice.
yeah, I think during the when they were pursuing the Claudite, whose name escapes me for whatever reason, but
Sam Wessel.
thank you. I was like, I knew it was the
No
Z, and I
problem.
want to say Zora, and I knew that was not it. But at any rate, it's the bringing in like the outside food type of a thing. I mean, kids do it all the time. We sent our boys with lunches to school or whatever,
Sure.
but
Mhm.
but then the cafeteria food is bland, but it's not going to poison you. It's what you brought from home. On the other hand. So, and then he just
Exactly.
takes that kid's drink. It's like, sorry, I need to borrow your drink. You're not borrowing his drink. You're just taking his
Right.
drink. So,
Which, I mean, realistically, he probably just saved that kid's life. However,
yeah,
he could have definitely just went to straight to the source of the suppliers.
right. What did you think about the Mugens?
Very interesting, and we never see them again. You know, of course, right away, you get that Egyptian
They,
vibe, and or do we see them again?
yeah, they do show up. This is their first appearance
Okay.
in Star Wars ever, but they also show up in some of the other Mandalore episodes when Darth Maul's putting together his army.
Oh, okay. I think I vaguely remember that now, but I think they're a very cool design.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, of course, Star Wars always borrows from different cultural and historical influences and whatnot. But, you know, just slimy suppliers.
Yeah, it was interesting that they chose that Egyptian pharaoh motif for
Hmm.
their design there. It's weird is that, and maybe this is some sort of a Mandela effect, but or maybe it's just because I've watched the Clone Wars so many times, but it wasn't until I went into the episode guide and looked up some stuff about this that I realized this was in fact the first time we'd seen Mugens. I would have sworn that maybe one of them had shown up in a movie or we had seen them earlier in the series at some point. But so it was kind of weird to realize that this was their first appearance
Hmm.
ever. But
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes things just kind of morph together because we've gotten so much Star Wars. So I know
mhm.
for me, it's always hard to place exactly where and when I've seen something. So,
They seemed a bit more like vile Ferengi from Star Trek to me. The Ferengi are the business beings of the galaxy, and they're willing to bend their morals a little bit in the pursuit of profit. They wouldn't typically do something as amoral as diluting something to the point where it would harm children like that, but
mhm.
just this like pursuit of profit. And this is all we know of Mugen is these smugglers. I'm sure there's plenty of Mugen out there that aren't engaged in this type of thing at all, but this is all we know of them here.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if they all don the same sorts of headdresses.
Hard to say, hard
Who
to say.
knows?
So, yeah, I mean that's most of the episode right there. I think we hit all the high points. That the whole thing ends with Padme getting ready to return to Coruscant, but she and Satine meet one last time, and Satine requests that maybe they send a Jedi that could work undercover to get to the bottom of everything that's happening there on Mandalore, and that's what we'll see in the next episode. But and of course, we know Ahsoka is going to be the one that they send for all that. But anything else about this episode we haven't covered that you want to make sure we get to before we go?
Sure. Yeah, I think she was definitely hoping for Obi-Wan, just saying. But I
I
think
don't
for
think Obi-Wan would work. I think he's too recognizable in that
Oh,
situation,
yeah.
and they needed someone undercover. So
There you go. There you go.
yeah.
That's a good point. But I think for Satine, this was also a good lesson in that she needs to be on the lookout for threats other than just Death Watch, because she sounded kind of like a broken record. Like, is it Death Watch? Is this Death Watch? Did Death Watch do this? Are you related to, are you conspiring with Death Watch?
I thought
So,
she was the one that said it wasn't Death Watch because they target her as opposed to, because wasn't it Almec that suggested it was Death Watch? He said no because they typically target me.
but she did still entertain the idea that it could be them. You know
Okay.
what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
I think that she now realizes that there could be threats that can arise from other areas and that it's not just that. And maybe Almec was the one that needed to learn that lesson even more than Satine then, from what you
He's going to
pointed
become
out.
all kinds of problems in the near
I
future.
know. Oh, yeah, a
Yeah.
little foreshadowing there maybe.
Yeah. I think I felt for Satine because, as we were talking about, she worked so hard to secure the neutrality for her home world. Her people, kept keeping them out of this war because, they've survived generations and generations and generations of war that have decimated their planet, and now they're recovering. They've rejected the Death Watch type of a society, and while they still have some aspects of a warrior culture, they're rebuilding and back in a more peaceful way. And the idea is so that they can prosper. And after all of that, she just finds these layers and layers of corruption that
Mhm,
she wasn't really aware of before. And so it's just kind of like her problems have just compounded on her. And
mhm.
yeah, I mean, who can blame her for focusing where she was? But now the job just got that much more difficult.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And I think she was hoping that once she reached that plateau of, the neutrality and all that, that things would be just sunshine and rainbows. And now she's finding out that that is definitely not the case.
Indeed. Okay, well then, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here for this discussion of the Clone Wars on Podcast Stardust. We thank you all for joining us and hope you've enjoyed it. We got plenty more Clone Wars to go, and we'll be discussing it on mostly a weekly basis up until we get some new television on Disney Plus released, in which case we'll take a break and while we address things like the Star Wars Visions, the Ninth Jedi, and Maul, Shadow Lord, and those are the ones that we know are coming sooner rather than later, and then eventually Ahsoka Season 2. But again, anyways, if you want to catch those episodes of the Clone Wars as we discuss them here on the show, those typically happen on Mondays. The schedule is just weird this week, so we got it on Wednesday. But make sure to subscribe to the podcast, and those will download automatically to your podcatcher of choice. We're available pretty much on every platform. And once you've subscribed, we really appreciate your ratings and reviews. Those do help get the show in front of more people, especially if you're over on Apple Podcasts. The entire back catalog of the show can be found over on retrozap.com. So all previous 985 episodes are there, as well as the other shows that are currently on the network. And there's several good ones there for you to check out. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody one more time what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found online?
Yeah, for sure. And just want to say hello there to all of our new listeners because I know we have a few. We've gained some new followers on Instagram, so you can find us there as well as Facebook at Podcast Stardust. And you can check out all of our fun Pinterest boards, and you can also subscribe to us on all of our other outlets as well, including YouTube and YouTube Music. So please hit us up over there, leave us some reviews, share those out with your friends, and let us know what you thought of this episode of the Clone Wars or any of our other episodes as well. And we'd love it if you'd send us an email. We are at podcaststardust@gmail.com, and we are quickly approaching episode 1000. So we really would love to have some listener questions to put those together in a fun episode to answer those listener questions as well. And then last but not least, you can also support us on our TeePublic store, which is basically at the link in our show notes. That's the easiest way to find it. And you can snag yourself everything from t-shirts and sweatshirts to coffee mugs and tote bags and all kinds of fun stuff. And we have 7 different show logo designs to look at and choose from. So if you need a closet refresh for the new year, that's the place to go.
Okay, upcoming on the show on Friday, we'll be getting into Star Wars news, and then on Monday, we'll be right back with the Clone Wars. So if you want to hear what happens, or our take on what happens right after this episode, then make sure you come back for both of those. So if that said, thanks for listening to episode 986 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and until next time, may the Force be with you.